The Victorian government's border permit system is in disarray. More and more ordinary Victorians desperate to return home from other states are reporting their applications have been knocked back by authorities, including boarding school students who have been forced to choose between staying at home or staying at school. Liberal Senator Sarah Henderson isn't pulling her punches. She's called for constitutional reform to fix this border fiasco, and she's got some strong words for the Premier Daniel Andrews. Senator Henderson joins me now from Melbourne. Senator Henderson, thank you for your time. How many Victorians have you spoken to who have been locked out of their own state by Daniel Andrews?
Well, Peter, good evening. And I am hearing more and more cases where Victorians are being stranded, principally in New South Wales, unable to return to Victoria and cross the border because they've been refused permits. And they include school children, they include pensioners who have been travelling, retirees who've headed north to visit family. And from my calculation, Peter, it seems there are hundreds of Victorians who are caught at the border, and the Victorian government, in what is nothing short of cruelty and callousness, is just simply denying them permits, the right to come home, even when people are fully vaccinated, even when they've had multiple COVID negative tests, even when they've guaranteed to travel straight home and go into their homes in quarantine. And as for school students, there are a bunch of kids at Yanco Agricultural High School, Victorian regional kids living on farms. Some of them have been forced to go into hotel quarantine in Melbourne. Of course, travelling from a COVID-free region to a COVID hotspot. And if they want to return to Victoria, they've now been told that perhaps they won't get any more border crossing exemptions, which puts their whole schooling in jeopardy. Peter, I have to tell you, I am so angry. I am so outraged. I cannot believe the cruelty of this government. It is beyond the pale.
Well, I know you spent a lot of time representing the Geelong region. You're Senator for Victoria, of course. I know you're also aware of another tragic suicide in Geelong last Friday. I mentioned it on the show, 15-year-old schoolboy, the third boy in that school in the last 2 years. We know lockdowns are making life very difficult for young people. Why on earth would government then compound it by locking these students out of their homes?
Look, I absolutely have no idea. We have seen rolling decisions by this government, which showing not just no compassion, Peter, it's actually worse than that, showing a demonstrable lack of regard for basic human rights. And we've seen the situations, and I saw your beautiful interview with Anne Schumann talking about we've seen other situations, of course. You've got me, Peter?
Oh, please go. I just was worried we had a problem with the sound. Please keep going, Sarah.
No worries. So we have seen a terrible situation where a number of people grieving from the loss of children have been denied an exemption for a funeral. The terrible case of a little boy in Warrnambool, of course, and we've now had the tragic suicide in the Geelong region just last week. So, as I say, I don't think this is just an issue of compassion. I think this is an issue of basic human rights. And while the Australian Constitution does not guarantee a right to freedom of movement in the Constitution, and the High Court has made that clear, there's no implied right. I actually do think that this builds the case for constitutional reform so that we could look at something like including in our Constitution an inherent right to freedom of movement, because frankly, no Premier has absolute power. All governments must comply with the rule of law. And I think things are so serious in Victoria with some of the decisions being made that constitutional reform has to be on the table.
How do you think Victorians feel tonight? A lot of people contacted me. They thought they might have some sense of a roadmap out there today. All they've got is playgrounds open, which everyone argues should never have been shut in the first place, and a little bit come the end of September, but talk that this is going to run right the way through till December or longer.
Well, we have the national plan. We have the COVID-19 national plan, which makes it very clear, as agreed by all state premiers, that we must come out of lockdown once we reach those 70 and 80% vaccination rates. And we're seeing real hope and confidence in New South Credlin because Gladys Berejiklian is sticking to the plan and she's making that very clear. I don't think we've got that confidence in Victoria. We have these rolling lockdowns. We have a situation where we have no hope in sight. And frankly, I think more Victorians are now looking at some of these public health restrictions very sceptically, Peter, because, for instance, the ban on playgrounds, what was the public health advice which supported a ban on playgrounds, for God's sake? I mean, can you imagine being a mum in an apartment, cooped up with 3 or 4 kids and not being able to go to the playground? It is absolutely obscene. And now this ban has been lifted. And it seems to me the only reason this has been lifted is not because of a change in public health advice, it's because of the political heat on Daniel Andrews. So it just seems to me that the political heat is guiding this and guiding these restrictions in Victoria just as much as the public health advice. And I think Victorians are losing hope, and that's why I would like to see constitutional reform. We've got to have that discussion. We've got to put it on the table because, as we have seen, Peter, Daniel Andrews is running out of control.
I've got to leave it there, but I tell you what, the only way you're going to get constitutional reform is if there is a Fair Income Royal Commission into this pandemic, all the things we got right, but all the things we didn't get right, so that next time round there'll be another one. There's no doubt about that. We're not in the state we are now, but that's in your bailiwick, not mine.